Welcome to the universe of Relic Worlds. It's 300 years in the future, humanity has gone out into the stars and has colonized multiple planets, but they haven't come across any alien civilizations. None that still exist anyway. They have found the ruins of multiple places and artifacts, some of which are very powerful, and our main character in the series, Lancaster James, is going to these various ruins and finding these artifacts and trying to put them together to figure out what happened to other aliens in the universe and to see what the artifacts do. Many of them are very powerful. In this storyline, in RPG Storytime, we are going to be following a group of pirates who are going around different places, and they have recently discovered the power of some of these artifacts and how they can benefit them, especially financially. Now, this particular game was played at Orccon in Los Angeles. It's a game convention. Our players are listed down below. They basically created the story by being the various characters. It was really enjoyable and a very interesting game, and this is going to be a continuing one whenever I run these at game conventions, and it's basically the spin-off to the Relic Worlds storyline. You can find the Relic Worlds books themselves also listed in the doobly-doo below. It is an entire series, and you can also read more about it at relicworlds.com. Enjoy! The Black Lotus emerged from Spectrum Drive near the desolate planet Precios of the Gallipia system. Their captain, Shasa Kerikova, had been contacted by the manager of a small outpost there, Adela Nashakira. Manager Nashakira was a friend of Captain Kerikova, or perhaps more accurately, a contact, for pirates rarely have friends. She knew that the captain was interested in rare alien artifacts that were occasionally discovered on planets throughout the galaxy, so Nashakira figured she'd be interested in this. Captain Kerikova took the shuttle down to the outpost along with her engineer Domi Dalina, her weapons officer Vussily Karpov, her raider sergeant Ricard Tenac, and one of their raiders. She left her brother Otto in charge of the Black Lotus in orbit. Shasa went directly to headquarters with Domi, who might have some technical questions or ideas, and Ricard and his raider waited at the shuttle. He didn't trust anyone at the outpost yet, and was ready in case of a signal for help. The manager got right to business with the captain. She told her that the outpost scouts had recently come across an ancient tomb nestled up against the mountains about 50 miles into the desert. It seemed to be an important structure, one that could have invaluable treasures inside. However, they did not want to risk their own people. They didn't have enough to spare. There had been attacks on the outpost and the mines by local creatures they called the Lobster Men. As such, they were willing to pay the crew of the Black Lotus to go to the tomb, explore it, and report what they find back at the outpost. They could keep whatever they could carry, just as long as they reported back the rest of the findings. The outpost would pay them 500 electros for the job. After their meeting with the manager, Shasa and the crew had a few minutes before they needed to go, so they used it looking around the camp. Shasa spent the time meandering about the science research building, browsing the shelves to see what the miners had brought back in the past. There was little of interest, but it was clear they had odds and ends from an alien ruin. One of the researchers took a special interest in Shasa, and they discussed what sort of alien artifacts there were. The researcher told Shasa that he understood the relics to be from a race known as the Chiotho. He said there was an item of special importance that was supposed to be in the tomb to which they were headed. It was an ivory idol that resembled an elephant. He said that he could wrangle up an extra 500 electros if she could bring that idol to him. He also told her a little bit about the layout of the ruins they had seen before, saying that she might want to keep a lookout for markings on the pillars. They could mean something. Domi and Vussily, meanwhile, loitered near the supply area, peeking at what they had. There wasn't much. The camp was intended primarily for working, though they did have a rapid-fire rifle that caught Vussily's well-trained eyes for weaponry. And he also took an interest in the explosives. Aware that these mercenaries were going on a mission for the camp, the supply sergeant offered them a price. When Vussily paid for them, the sergeant gave a few more explosives since they had them in abundant supply. Domi was more interested in a very rare item they had tucked away near the back. As an engineer who had traveled across the known galaxy, she had an eye for extraordinary tools. This was a tool so rare that she had thought it only a legend, an inventor at a university who also taught metallurgy and studied alien cultures, had begun to recognize certain properties that existed in most ancient alien artifacts. These compounds had to be inside many items to preserve their structures over the millions of years. Thus, he was able to invent a sort of metal detector that could aid in locating ancient alien relics. Okay, game note here. For those of you who know the Savage World system, here's what actually happened. The player needed a 4 to find something she wanted, and she rolled a 33, using an 8-sided die. This means she rolled an 8 4 times in a row, then a 1. So yeah, that's why she found such a kick-ass item. Okay, back to the story. The Raider Sergeant Ricard Tenac and his raider, at last moseyed into town about the time it was time to get going. The outpost manager had provided them with a truck that had a large turret in the back. Ricard took the driver's seat with his raider at his side. Vussily manned the large gun in the back, and the others sat in the chairs. They raced out into the desert in the direction of the alien ruins. Approximately 20 miles out, they came upon a crashed spaceship. It was not of alien make, it was a corporate ship, apparently making a small supply run as it had a small amount of storage space. Tenac slid the truck to a stop, nearly knocking the truck over, but making a bitching cloud of sand that covered over the ship's remains. Shasa and Domi got out of the back and headed toward the ship to investigate. Vussily stayed with the gun to stand guard, and seeing that the perimeter was covered, Tenac and the raider, who Tenac was now calling Slappy, headed over to investigate with them. Tenac went in first to make sure the coast was clear. There were bloodstains in the cockpit, but the crew was gone. There was not even a trace of them. He opened the crate to see what was inside and found several jewels. Eyeing them with a quick appraisal, he found they were worth about 200 electros. He pocketed them, mostly in a hidden compartment of his jacket, and went back outside. "All I found, some jewels," he announced, tossing one of them to his captain. "About 15 electros worth." It sounded to Shasa like there wasn't much to be found, but she ordered Domi to look over the engineering section while she searched storage. Tenac left the raider Slappy to watch the perimeter of the ship while he went back inside to search again. He found some body armor that could come in handy, while Shasa found a jumpsuit with special wiring that made its wearer more fluid in their motions. Domi found little in the way of valuables, but she did find basic equipment she figured the supply sergeant she had spoken with back at camp might pay a pretty penny for. She also found that she could probably get the thrusters working again on the ship. That was when the alarm sounded from outside. Both Slappy and Vussily shouted at the same time. Shasa and Tenac rushed outside to see what they were screaming about. A small horde of red, lobster-like creatures were crashing through the sand dune, beelining directly toward them. They had long, sharp claws and crude weapons in their hands. Most frightening of all was their speed, and the hungry looks in their eyes. The pirates all opened fire together, save for Domi, who was still in the back of the downed ship. Vussily was the most successful, mowing down a bunch of creatures. The animals were fast, but there were few left to get close. Then Shasa noticed more of them coming from the other side of the ship. She called for the others, but was just barely too late as they were on her before she had time to react. The lead one stabbed into her and tore with its claws, weapon, and teeth. Blood flew from her flailing body and blanketed the ground. Tenac grabbed her and pulled her back, firing into the creature point blank and blowing it to pieces. The others turned at the oncoming horde, but there were too many of them, and they were almost right on top of the team. Then Domi activated the thrusters, blasting into the monsters, vaporizing most of them. The survivors found the entrance to the ship and crowded in on Domi. Slappy found the monsters and shot them down. The survivors from the other direction were meanwhile finished off by Vussily. Tenac laid his captain down. She was unresponsive, bleeding badly. It appeared that their captain was dead. They wondered how they would tell the crew, what they would tell her brother, the first officer. Then Domi thought to check her pulse and found that she was still alive. None of them were medics, but they had a med kit in the truck, so they did their best to stop the bleeding and kept sound out of the wounds. Soon she was stabilized, and in another hour regained consciousness. She had been wounded badly, but not fatally. "Bring me my damn ship," she said when she awoke. The others breathed a sigh of relief. They discussed going back, but Shasa urged them to push on. The others admired her tenacity, but in truth, she knew how close they were to being broke at any given time. She needed this score to satisfy her crew, who were, despite everything else, still pirates. They spotted the ruins from several miles away. They jutted out of a ridge rock of outcroppings with a few dozen pillars standing upon platforms that grew out of the sand and boulders. Tenac raced up to them and skidded right up to one of the pillars, barely missing it. Shasa, in pain from the reckless driving jostling her wounds, shouted curses up to her chief raider, who just responded, "Glad you're feeling better," and got out of the cab with his soldier. Vussily helped the captain out, handing her some explosives that he had obtained from the outpost. "In case we need some heavier firepower," he said. "I have no intention of destroying valuable treasure," the captain responded, but Vussily insisted, saying it was better to be safe than sorry. He then manned the gun again to watch for more lobster monsters while the rest of the team investigated the ruins. Tenac and Slappy took point, passing between the pillars, watching for more creatures or traps. Domi escorted Shasa as they studied the structures along the way. Just as the researcher had said, there were markings on the pillars. They were abstract designs mostly, some might have been pictures, and all were in rows leading up the pillars. Tenac and Slappy marched up the steps toward the double doors set into the rock face, as if daring traps to go off. He too noticed the hieroglyphs on the pillars, but took notice of any details. When he arrived at the door, Tenac found no door handles, so he shot it. The solid stone doors held firm. "Well," he said, "I've tried," and he stepped aside for someone else to do something. Shasa and Domi stepped up to the doors and looked them over, while Shasa tried to figure out the best way to get through them without using Vussily's explosives. Domi took a look at the pillars nearest the doors. These were slightly different than the rest. It took a trained eye that was used to gears to notice that there were very thin ridges hidden vertically in the pillar. Each row of hieroglyphs could be turned. Shasa looked at the pillars and agreed with Domi's theory. She chose one of the hieroglyphs that looked most like a symbol for something being open, and set everyone to work twisting the gears until they had an entire row on both sides of that one symbol. Once they were all aligned, a rattling and a creaking sound emerged, and the large double doors swung slowly open. Tenac and the raider again took point, checking the room for hostiles. Domi used the alien alloys detector she had just acquired to see if she could get a reading. There were no strong readings, but she did get something coming from the ground below. They found no stairs, but there were cement slabs that Shasa noticed were discolored. "These probably open," she said, but once again, how? Vussily arrived about the same time that Domi switched her search to studying the pillars inside the room. These too had hieroglyphs, and these could be turned like the ones outside. The big difference was that these had only two symbols, eyes and crabs. "I've had enough with crustaceans," Tenac said, and Shasa full-heartedly agreed, feeling the heavy wound to her gut. So she and Domi decided on the eyes, and they twisted the pillars so the eyes were all looking at each other. A loud clanging and rattling filled the room, and the discolored floors pulled away, revealing stairs that led down into the bowels of the ruins, the tomb itself. Tenac again led the way, creeping down the stairs with his rifle at the ready. His flashlight at the end of the rifle shone a spot in front of him to show a small tunnel of where he was going. The stairs led to a wall with a passageway on either side. He rounded this corner to find a chamber with one exit at the end, and paintings lining both sides. Tenac called the all clear, and everyone else came down. They all took an interest in the artwork, studying what was on them, except Vussily, who studied the only other exit. There was little he could see. Steps led down into a smaller chamber where he could just make out a pedestal. The paintings were various images of creatures dressed in fancy garments and often surrounded by objects made of precious metals doing heroic deeds. The creature had a squid-like face and a sleek body with ornate clothing. After looking closely at them, Tenac came to realize that the creature in all of these pictures was the same person. It was likely a person of some royal lineage, perhaps the one buried in this tomb. "That means a lot of treasure to be found," he muttered. Shasa told them to keep their eyes open, especially for an ivory statue that looks like an elephant. She knew where she could sell it for a decent amount of electros. With that in mind, they continued on to the next chamber, all except Tenac, who pretended to still be studying one of the paintings. In truth, while he was studying, per se, he was really trying to figure out how to take one of them off the wall. The following room had treasure enough, however, as it was the burial chamber itself. A pile of treasure sat upon a platform at the center of which was a golden urn. The urn, the final resting place of the monarch depicted in the paintings. Atop the urn rested a jewel-encrusted scepter. Its historic value would make it desired by schools, its artistic value would make it sought after by museums, and the value of its gems and precious metals would make it worth an unspeakable amount. Combined with the other treasures on the table, this would be an incredible haul. Vussily decided to take it upon himself to locate the ivory statue. Not seeing it on the platform, he set about looking around the room for it. As he passed one section of the wall, Domi noticed a thin crack that was vertical and ran straight to the ground. Shasa stepped up to the platform carefully while the others stood around her. She looked over the treasures, her eyes swimming with excitement over this find. Then the mood was broken by a loud electrical zap from the next room. Tenac had tried to take a painting off the wall, and a lightning bolt had thrown him back, his hair standing on end. Vussily hurried back to help him, but he was fine. It was a reminder, however, of what could be awaiting Shasa if she wasn't careful taking this treasure. She turned back to the platform, she poured her eyes over the scepter, she concentrated hard on it, studying every detail, and... ah, hell, then she just grabbed it and ran for the exit. As soon as she did, the ceiling in every room began to drop, and worse yet, a stone slab fell from the ceiling to seal them in. Shasa jumped at it, and, with nothing else to stop it, she stuck the scepter between the floor and the door to keep it wedged open. "Quickly," she shouted, "crawl through!" Vussily crawled through first. As he went, the slab pressed down on the shaking scepter, which was barely holding it up. It began to buckle. Shasa called for Domi to go next, but Domi instead went for the secret door she had found. She swung it open, and Slappy ran through it with her. They wound through a twisting corridor, and when they looked behind them, their captain was nowhere to be found. The ceiling was closing down on them, so there was no time to go back for Shasa. They had to hurry. That's when a horde of scarab beetles crawled out from numerous holes in the walls and ceiling and swarmed all around them. Domi managed to skip through them, leaping over a small ivory statue of a creature that looked like an elephant, and got to a flight of stairs. But there was no such luck for Slappy. The beetles crawled all over him, consuming him. Domi got to the top of the steps, but there was no exit, just a cement ceiling. More scarab beetles swarmed the floor and began crawling up the stairs like a wicked hand reaching for Domi. She pressed on the ceiling and found that it gave way. She pressed harder, opening the trapdoor, and she dove out. Inside the painting chamber, Vussily found Tenac trying to hold the ceiling up with a painting frame that he had managed to get off the wall. It was no use. The frame buckled under the weight of the ceiling. The two of them had to duck down as they hurried out. Vussily looked back one last time at the sealed tomb that had trapped his captain. There was no way to rescue her. They raced up the stairs and outside. Behind them, they heard an explosion. The tomb was self-destructing. They ran for their lives and out the front where they found Domi in the ruins. Seeing no one with her, Tenac asked, "Slappy?" Domi shook her head. He was gone. Then Vussily asked, "The captain?" Domi just shook her head. They all lowered their heads, wondering what they would do now. Again, they wondered how they would tell the crew, how they would tell her brother Otto. Tenac said, "Well, I'm the captain now." Smoke began to billow out the large entrance of the tomb. The rumbling of the distant explosion subsided. Then a form came limping out, coughing and sputtering. Tenac and Vussily prepared their weapons, ready for whatever monster might have followed them. And it was Captain Shasa Kerikova. "The hell you are," she said to Tenac. "Bring me my damned ship." Their relief soon turned to anguish as they realized they had come out of the tomb empty-handed. All the treasure had been squashed either by the lowering ceiling or the explosives Shasa had set to blow open the stone slab so she could make her escape. This, by the way, was what the others had heard when they thought the tomb was self-destructing. There was a cold silence in the truck as they headed back toward the outpost. Shasa was especially scared. How would she compensate the crew for risking their lives on a venture like this? Their pay from the outpost would barely cover the maintenance of the ship, not the crew. Then they came upon a welcome sight, the downed ship they had seen earlier. It still had more cargo to rummage through, and it had ship parts, but they would strip it of everything and use it in their ship, then sell whatever they needed to. It wasn't an emperor's treasure, but it was at least something to keep the adventure from being a total loss.